So yeah, Alan Crawford, I've known him since the Live Journal days. He was hanging out with Momus. I was reading Momus's Live Journal, and then he was Lord Whimsy. And I added him, and he's just a fantastic artist. I mean, you've seen this. He came up with this in like a day when I needed a cover. Like, he had done all the interior stuff, and then when I needed a cover, he was just like, give me a few minutes. And then like the next day, he was like that. I was like, wow, that is just like the coolest thing. He's got, chess, golf, archery, hockey. And he did interior illustrations for all of them. The golf ones I'm going to read, he's shaving with a golf club made of animal hair. This is the air hockey one, where he moves the paddle with his face. My favorite illustration is the speed skating one. This gentleman's name is Veloso, which is Italian for Harry. And he's obsessed with his initial V, and he has the V in his mustache, and shaved into his chest hair. And because it couldn't be, a 360 view, he also has it shaved into his back hair. But this is, the golf story is quite long. I'm going to read about 2/3 because always leave them wanting more. But this is called The King of Clubs. Brian Lowe Parker cupped cold water from the faucet onto his fresh face and stared hard at the mirror, drops dripping from his nose and sliding off his chin. His eyes contained a curious mixture of despair, resilience, and general put-uponness. B-Lo, as he was known, usually to his chagrin, had had a rough night, following an even rougher day in the latest in an ever-progressing chain of rough weekends that featured playing 36 holes with his boss, Augustus Masterson. I realize that seems a bit egocentric with my name being Aug and all. I assure you that name comes from the Masters golf tournament taking place in Augusta, Georgia. Though, that said, when was
that the only name? Was that the only name you had available?
Yes, he needed to be Augustus Masterson for the golf story.
Okay.
But I mean, when I was down south, I did make a point of going to St. Augustine and Augusta. Fantastic names for cities, in my opinion, and I enjoyed both towns very, very much. Masterson never tired of the predictable below par jokes whenever Brian failed to achieve this, which was usually 18 out of 18 times. And Brian never forgot the look of complete incomprehension on the one occasion he had attempted to explain to Masterson the origins of his family name. That his grandfather, Bogdan Parr, had come to America from Romania in 1897 with nothing but the hair on his head. Arriving in New York City, Bogdan soon fell in love with the Spitfire Belle Lowe, and albeit starting penniless, with Belle's personality and Bogdan's patience, the two built up one of the best car services going on the Lower East Side. In an effort to ingratiate himself to his newfound countrymen, Parr dropped the accent brave and added a curb, the whole thing sounding both American and automotive. He also began going by Dan, though legally and spiritually he never dropped the Bog, meaning as it does God. When the couple finally married, since they were such an excellent team already, it was only natural to combine their surnames as well. When Brian finished this story, Masterson silently teed up and let fly a hole in one. Rather than considering the tale to be a good luck charm, Masterson shot Brian a look of such frigid intensity that the latter never brought it up again. Despite his grandparents' successful business, still going strong 50 years later after being passed down to his father's eldest brother, Alexander, Brian found himself living upstate, working a separate job he didn't mind yet felt no real passion for either. As a mid-level executive for Caliber Advertising, he was one of those putting the U in Caliber. He secretly dreamt of writing novels, forging a genre that deftly combined detective fiction with gardening how-to manuals. If only he could get better at golf. It would not do to beat the boss, but oh, how exhilarating it would be to give him a run for his money. It seemed, however, that Masterson had rigged the system so there was no way for Brian to even practice his swing, let alone find the time to write. Weekends were spent on the links together, where Masterson derailed all conversation even approaching technique or theory, often striking Brian in the back of the knee with a 5-iron if Lowe Parker was seen working on his stance. And whatever other extra hours Brian had, Masterson filled up with further assignments. It was on just one of these, 3 days later, that Brian found himself back in the domain of his ancestors, worming his way around the Big Apple. He had spent the train journey once again writing extraneous reports to the exclusion of taking in any scenery. Though having clinched the deal with his client in record time, and a return ticket for much later that evening, a free afternoon now stretched out ahead of him. And so he wandered through the streets of Greenwich Village, somewhat lost but hoping to stumble upon a used bookshop containing volumes of obscure horticultural expertise. Soon, although there was no such tomes in the window, a sign caught his eye: Arthur's Preservation Affiliates, and Brian felt drawn inside. The large wooden door opened with a creak, and he stepped into a lost world of antique tables, china cups, jam jars full of coin and curios, military medals mostly, a scattering of regal-looking hats sitting atop broken billiard cues, and with a plethora of long-past relevant advertisements for new homes, pie stands, and forgotten vaudeville acts hanging on the walls and larger pieces of furniture. A cough emanated from behind the counter, followed by a voice and then a figure. "All right, mate." I'm not going to do a British accent. I realize that's very British, but we're in New York, so. "What brings you in today? Name is Arthur Lomax. Let me know if you see anything that tickles your fancy. I'm sure we can agree on a price. Everything's on sale. It's all got to go. The wife just moved to Australia with our 2 boys, Ray and Dave, and I'm joining them next month." Now, I'm a huge Kinks fan. This whole paragraph was pretty much taken from their song, The Village Green Preservation Society, one of my favorite songs of all time. Arthur being the album after that. Ray and Dave, obviously, being the brothers in the band. Australia was a song on Arthur. So there's a lot going on there. Brian nodded. He had spotted two overflowing bookshelves at the far end of the room and started to make his way towards them. Arthur Lomax coughed again in what he intended as a reassuring take-your-time timbre, at which Brian's attention was diverted to his right, looking now past the proprietor and up over the counter. "Beer?" Arthur asked, noncommittally. Sure," Brian replied, his gaze remaining on what hung on the eastern wall. Arthur Lomax, polishing 2 pint glasses, followed Brian's sightline before he began filling these from a keg barely visible beneath the cash register. Glass full, Brian accepted it without taking his eyes off the paintings. He stood awestruck before them, repeatedly running his open palm over his clean-shaven face. In the frame on the left, a dapper gentleman with a magnificent mustache was crouched over a ball amidst the copse of beech trees, one eye closed as he peered down the length of what looked like a golf club, across to the far side of a frozen lake where a group of other similarly dressed men huddled around a stake in the ground. The portrait on the right showcased this same man hovering over a small boy, letting his mustache droop down onto the stick he's teaching the child to hold. Lomax, stroking his own extended mustache, interjected into Brian's reverie. "You're familiar with the game of golf? Old Dutch tradition, and as you are no doubt aware, they settled this city, New Amsterdam and all that. Though I can't imagine playing it on the streets nowadays. Someone will steal your balls before you even get to the first hole. It's not all that dirty." Funny old chap brought that one in on the right, and it seemed to be in need of getting some convoluted story involving the Royal Canadian Police and an unusually large snake. I stopped him halfway through. "The less I know, the better, son." None of this kept him from jabbering, though, a mile a minute, that one. For a fellow with the law on his tail, he sure had time to talk. I eventually told him a picture is worth 1,000 words, and I ain't paying you for both. Lomax indicated the painting on the right, an original Raymond Kolk, that one, to add to my other beauty. He motioned to the scene on the left, spilling some of his beer in the process. Been in the family for years, centuries even. Joost de Heer the Elder, birdies against an icy sky. Now, I'm going to point this out because I don't expect anyone to get this, but I was thrilled when I came up with this pun. It being a golf story, I wanted a pun with birdie in it. And on Van Halen's 3rd album, 1980's Women and Children First, the very last song, in a simple rhyme, is one of the very rare true love songs they ever wrote. Lovely song. And in the middle 8, they take it down. There's lots of oohs and ahs, and David Lee Roth sings, and she heard the mountains singing, "Birds against an icy sky." So when I could work in the title of the painting to be "Birdies against an icy sky," it fills me with joy every time I read it. I don't expect anyone in the world to get that. Now back to the story. My great-grandfather brought it from the old country, after his great-grandfather brought it to England from his old country. Raymond Kolk's always been a huge figure in my life, named my eldest after him, and styled my tash after Joost de Heer's. He twirled this consideringly. Wanted to be a painter myself until other things, he swept his arm in an arc about the store, spilling even more of his beverage, got in the way. That portrait on the right, Lomax continued, Joost de Heer III takes his first swing Reminds me of teaching young Ray the game. Say, you don't golf, do you? I've been itching to get out on the links. See, the bloke who brought in the painting also sold me this. Lomax hoisted up a sort of stick, whose dark, rich texture seemed to draw in all the surrounding light in the shop, spinning this around and around, sliding up and down in his hand as he carried on with his story. Now, I've always heard rumors of the legendary Cavern Club, pulled from the rock in the cave outside St. Andrews. I can tell by the look on your face you are unfamiliar. You must not care enough for the game then, son. Allow me to set the scene. Early 15th century. Robert the Hopeful and his trusty knight, Ted of Comfort, are out traversing the Scottish countryside. Who knows what historical significance the two of them had originally set out for, but the story goes that after making camp in a particularly damp section of woods their first night, they were each visited by visions of a cosmic cow instructing them to make haste towards a precise location. Both being sensible men, they naturally ignored the advice of any intergalactic bovine emanating from their cattle-addled unconscious, and yet the following morning they ended up at the very site the creature spoke of anyway. Without much time to be flummoxed either, as peering through the trees, they saw a giant tiger prowling the perimeter of the cave's entrance. Neither could recall what the cow had said would be awaiting them inside. In fact, each considered the animal's monologue to be a bit wordy, dozing off again within their own dreams. But now that they were here... Wait a minute, Brian interrupted. What was a tiger doing in Scotland? Lomax wrinkled his nose at the absurd query. Guarding this cave, obviously. Now, but how did it get there? What a ridiculous question. I mean, at this momentous occasion, they had more important matters to deal with, even if the tiger could tell them. Arthur Lomax stared his impertinent customer into submission. When he was satisfied Brian wouldn't waste any more of his time, he resumed his tale. Now, how they were going to get past this jungle cat into the cave is a much more reasonable puzzle to be occupying your mind. And believe me, it did theirs. Arthur spoke as if he had observed the proceedings himself rather than having heard an nth generation version of them from a dope-crazed thief. Finally, true to his name, Ted of Comfort remembered a quantity of opium he had in his rucksack. How did he get opium in Scotland in the 15th century? From a Portuguese sailor. Arthur dismissed out of hand any possible retort to this, plowing straight on. The two soon hatched upon an idea. First, they would smoke the hash to give them a vision of what to do. Unfortunately, the vision turned out to be drug the tiger with the very opium they had just finished. But they did see that this plan would have worked magnificently. It would have, too. And so, as they awaited the return of sobriety, the two sat down to ponder the eternal question of, how do you trap a tiger in the woods? Eventually, Robert the Hopeful, true to his name, snapped his fingers. I've got it! What we need is another tiger of the opposite sex to create a distraction. But where would they find that in Scotland, as you so rightly pointed out a minute ago? Brian noted Arthur's menacing tone and offered, maybe from another Portuguese sailor? Or the same seafaring lad, Arthur shot back. Anyways, during the course of his ruminations upon the problem, Robert recalled a foggy glimpse of a tiger hide he had once spotted for sale at a market stall in Edinburgh, and in his excitement that their plans lay within reach, he became convinced that the vendor actually owned a whole shop, its multiple rooms overflowing, dedicated solely to the selling of tiger skins. Arthur broke off to allow Brian to raise an eyebrow. Robert set foot apace in the direction of the great city with Ted in his wake, attempting both to keep up and to understand. When they stopped to sup from a stream, Ted was finally able to give voice to his confusion. Robert put a reassuring hand on his compatriot's shoulder. It's simple, he said. When you don the fur, the tiger will begin to chase after you, and I will rush into the cave and remove its treasure. Ted's eyes betrayed fear and disbelief that his friend saw nothing wrong with this plan. As Robert moved to press on, Ted called out, but how do I escape the great beast? Robert paused to consider this for the first time. If you simply toss off the pelt, the creature will go after that. But what if, when it realizes the skin is just that? Ted gulped, desperate to convey the dangers of the proposed field operation to his companion. It returns to its guard position and mauls your good self. Robert paused again. He had not thought of this either. His grand plan did not extend past the bounteous reward he would find within the walls of the cave. a treasure so vast he could open his own tiger skin shop if he so desired. The two carried on, Ted growing ever more fretful, until he noticed a mound of clay near the next stream they came across, its color a curious orange. They had just passed a field of cows, terrestrial this time, when a scheme of his own began to take shape in his panicking mind. It took some convincing, plus sulking on Robert's part about the next trip to the city, but the two were soon leading a mud-caked cow back in the direction from whence they had come. They had spent a good hour sculpting orange stripes over the animal's brown hide. And if that other cow's monologue had rubbed them the wrong way, this animal certainly appreciated the more literal hands-on massaging. Their unpreparedness of what to do with the milk bearer once they arrived at the awaiting mouths of both cave and tiger didn't enter the equation, as once the destination was in sight, the tiger was already pouncing on the unsuspecting bovine. Ted ran up a tree while Robert almost accidentally ended up in the cave. Crouching behind a boulder, it being too dark to see anything, he kept his position until morning. When the sun finally shone in, Robert was baffled, spying not treasure chests nor sacks of loot, devoid of any magical swords or sleeping maidens. What greeted his irritated gaze was this. With great pride, Arthur twirled the baton in front of Brian's face. He waited a good 10 seconds for any look of awe to materialize there. With none forthcoming, he continued, "This, what I now hold in my hands, before your very eyes, what became known as the Cavern Club, its true name lost to the sand traps of time. Believe you me, whomever wields such a stick is given innumerable powers over that little white ball we all seek to sink." Despite himself, Brian felt drawn to the artifact, given to visions of how these properties might alter his life for the better. He reached out to stroke it. Arthur indulged him. Feel how smooth that is. Obviously forged from different strains of bestial hair. Probably what gives it such adaptability on the course. The head and most of the staff appears to be a mix of otter fur and sea lion whiskers, which stands to reason. They are the longest in the animal kingdom. But see this white line running through, circling up and around? Seems purely decorative, though you never know. I bet money that's Arctic fox hair. And the handle is, Arthur held the rod arm's length away from his face, squinting like a jeweler examining a diamond. Iberian, maybe Eurasian lynx. Chap who brought it in says he never lost a game with it in his hands. I've been meaning to. What happened next? What do you mean? When this Robert found himself in a cave with this strange object and a tiger waiting outside. Oh, that, Arthur let out a deep breath. Right. Well, this, tapping the head of the club into his palm, was stuck in a stone, you see. And Robert couldn't tell if the true treasure was on the end of it, lodged into that rock. So he put one foot on the boulder for extra purchase and pulled with everything he had. It came out remarkably easily, as if it had been reunited with its true owner. This line of thinking was confirmed when he walked outside brandishing his new find, and the tiger knelt down before him. Knelt down? A tiger? More of a bow, really, but yes. And then disappeared, its duty done. Aha! And this Ted of comfort came down from the tree and was obviously overjoyed about the tiger being gone, and the discovery of the club, of course. Of course, and what did they do next? Made their way to St. Andrews, and on into the great golf lore of history. But look, let's not waste any more time. If we leave now, we can still make 9 holes over at Forest Park. Try this baby out. I'm going to leave it there. Obviously, Brian buys the magical golf club and then takes on Augustus Masterson in quite the golf match at the end.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, thank you.